Okay, we're back. This is episode 21
Right.
of Alien Contacts in Bob's Life. It's January 16th, 2019.
When we left off with the previous episode, I told you that I would be bringing it up to date to a time that Gary had some dealings in Moscow with government figures there. He wouldn't tell me anything about most of these situations that he would go to. It's like a need-to-know basis, and I didn't need to know. I remember sitting in a lobby, and it was a good-sized lobby, kind of old-fashioned furnishings. Then Gary came out probably about 40 minutes later, got me by the arm to stand up, and then we went out and got in a car, went to a hotel, I think, and don't hold me to this because I may be off, but I think it was Hotel Moscow. I'm pretty sure it was. And we got a room, and we had just gone to bed, and all of a sudden there was noise out on the other side of the door. I got scared. I thought, oh my gosh, secret police, they're here to arrest us. Gary just told me, relax, everything's going to be okay, just stay in bed. He went to the door and opened it, and there was his son, Stephen, with a woman under each arm and a bottle in each hand. At that point, Gary told Stephen to come in and shut up so that he wouldn't make a commotion that would get us kicked out or get us on the radar of, I guess, secret police. He said, because if that happened, he'd have to take a lot of people's memories from them. So he told Stephen and his dates to lay on the floor. And then he came back to bed. And I protested. I said, we're not going to do this with your son in the room, and the noises they're making and everything. And he just said, well, I'm not leaving because if I do, he'll get himself in trouble. So he did his manly deed. And I think it was closer to morning that it would have been closer to morning here, that he told Stephen's two dates to get up, put their clothes on and leave. And then he had us matter transferred back to the orbiting spaceship, huge spaceship. I think the ship's name was called the Ren Gordek. It was named for my initials, Ren, and then Gordek for one of their previous lead senators. And I don't remember all the particulars about any of these episodes. I remember bits and pieces that stood out to me. There was a guy on board, his reptilian name is Arvin, at least that's part of it, and he works on temporal engineering, time travel stuff.
He's a scientist.
Right.
Brilliant.
Very. And
Probably had like over 200 IQ.
oh, I think most of them got us beat in that sense. He, at one point, had to go back to the War of 1812 here in America, where the British were trying to retake the colonies. And he had learned that there was a group of Nazis who had apparently shifted through time and were trying to rearrange the American history to see that it would come out in favor of the British. He corralled the Nazis wanted to stay and see if everything was going to work out like it should. And at that point, I just said, Stephen, you don't need to worry. There's going to be a tornado along any minute and it'll drive the British out, which it did. I said, unless you want to stay here and maybe end up learning how to fly in the funnel, I don't think it's worth it. So we left. We were matter transferred back up to the ship. The Nazis were executed on board the ship. Another situation was the Trinity site, where our scientists were working on the first atomic device, first atomic bomb. And apparently Stephen had to go down there. The most I can remember is that a couple of reptilians had gone down and they wanted to change the outcome of the war. They wanted to stop us from being able to successfully explode one of these devices. And Stephen got them corralled before they even got into the perimeter of the place. There were, excuse me, there were a number of situations that could have ended up in really changing the timeline. There were times that that Paul and I would be picked up by Greys or by, I think you've heard me mention the dredges and dancers, the demonics, along with the Greys working with them. And numerous times Gary was Johnny on the spot right there to gun down our abductors and to have us matter transferred back to a ship, and their medical corps would, check us over and make sure we were all right, and then we would get sent back to the ground. I have to say, with the matter transferal, you lose consciousness. To my knowledge, there's nothing like on Star Trek where they have the sparkly glitter-like look when people are teleporting or beaming from one place to another. I know one night Gary was actually in my room here. I had taken a pain pill for my back. I have severe scoliosis. And he kept waking me up and saying, "Did we take a pill? What kind of pill did we take?" And all I could think of, back pill, back pill, back pill. Finally he gave up and went on back to the ship and left me alone. He wanted to be careful about having me beamed up or matter transferred up if I was, if I had even a medical chemical in my system. One night I was eating with Gary and his friends in a restaurant and I got sick to my stomach. I excused myself. I went to the restroom. And all of a sudden, as I'm holding on to the commode, leaning over, his son Stephen comes in to see if I'm all right. And he puts his hand under my head to hold my head. The next thing I feel is him moving his other hand back and forth over my butt and making some wrong noises. And I told him, no, that's not going to happen. And he said, well, you can't stop me and you won't want to stop me. At that point, I grabbed his knife from a holder in his leg, and I stabbed him with it. I got out from the restroom. I was shaking. Arvin came from the restaurant over to me I was in the hallway between the restroom and the restaurant, leaning against the wall. And I remember Arvin, his voice, instead of his deep voice, it got very high, and he said, "It's going to be okay. You're going to be okay. It's going to be all right." And I told him what happened. At that point, he asked if I could stand long enough for him to get Gary, and I said yes. Then Gary came in, put his arm around my shoulders to make sure I didn't fall down, and had security and Arvin go take care of Stephen and take him to one of their med labs. He survived. He was okay. I explained what happened. Gary told me I was defending myself, which I was. And through all that, I did not throw up. Thought I was going to. And I got sent back. When I came to, there was still blood on my left hand. It wasn't mine. I guess they didn't. They may have thought they cleaned the blood off me or missed that or whatever. I don't know. Stephen could be a stinker at times, but he could also be very nice and caring. At one point, he got a dog after he got married, and he named it, now get this, Mutt Burger. He would never eat the dog, don't get me wrong, that wasn't the idea. It was a tease to him, so he called it Mutt Burger. They did have, he and his wife Treya did have a couple of kids, if I remember correctly. She was a space meteorologist, his wife was. Now, I'm jumping around here bit by bit. There were times that we camped out, like in Colorado or Wyoming. Their tents are inflatables, and somehow they can control the temperature inside those inflatable tents. But there's no heating element that I can see. I don't know how they did it. And then there were times that Paul and I would meet with some of their crew members, the new captain by the name of Craig Orr, but he told me to call him Craig. Nice guy, for the most part. It's like they handled me with kid gloves when I was around them. There were times when Paul and I would meet with Gary, excuse me, Gary and Stephen, other crew members would eat in a restaurant. One of the restaurants actually was owned by the captain, by Craig. He was quite a cook and invested in the restaurant on board. They had egg rolls that were like this long and this big around. That one egg roll is more than a meal in itself, and delicious. There were a few times that Gary took me flying with him in space when he'd have to renew certain levels of his flight status, as we would call it, I guess. He told me, he said, "You took flying lessons a while back," and I said, "Yeah, but that was a propeller-driven airplane, nothing like this." And he said, "Well, landing is still pretty much the same." So he had me land on board one of their flight bays. I remember sitting there shaking and cold palms and afraid I was going to crack us up or something. I didn't. I mean, it was a good landing. Went all right. He told me at one point, "Keep that up, And like they say on Earth, you might earn your wings. uh, I know at one point they had actually established a racetrack on board. Some of their crew loved speed, whether it's in a spaceship going faster than light, which actually when you're doing that, basically you feel like you're standing still. But this one time Gary got me to go with him in one of the race cars. I think it's like what we would call a stock car, only souped up. And he got it up over 120 some odd miles per hour. At that point, I'm begging him, please slow down, please stop, please slow down. I don't do speed well unless I'm driving. Slow down. And he finally did. Then he got out of the car and came over, opened my side of the car door, and looked me in the face and said, "Are you all right?" And I threw up on him. On his favorite jacket. He said, "You puked on me." And I said, "No, I hurled on you." But he didn't seem to act like it was a real problem. He had a love of firearms.
Hang on. Let me extrapolate on the racing a little bit.
Yeah.
This goes back a good number of years now. Bob's talking about, and there was a bunch of the officers, as well as the captain, that like to race and rode motorcycles as well, and a few times, several times I engaged in the races. And one of the lives I had before this, I did some competition racing, and I still have that bug in me. And they didn't have to goad me on. I in fact challenged them, and they didn't want. They were worried about, well, if something happens to you, blah, blah, blah. But they made it pretty safe, and it was, the track was like what some of you might understand as being a holodeck type of affair.
Physically holographic.
But very real. But if you did crash, you'd end up in some, barriers that, really absorb the crash, and, it was somewhat safer than what we have, here on the ground in real life. And over a number of months, over roughly a year, I engaged in several of these races, and it was a real big deal. And there were people on the crew betting on me, betting against me. Even people on the home world, we found out, were engaged. It was, a lot of heavy betting was going on. And I'm proud to say that a good number of those races I won.
Yep.
And I don't think they were too thrilled about that.
They weren't. I remember.
But that was pretty cool. A few times I rode some motorcycles as well, and they had both the captain and another captain. Bob mentioned Craig.
Mm-hmm.
He had a friend in California.
Yeah. Probably near Malibu.
Well, let's not get too into the detail, whatever. But he was a real rich guy, and he was away from his house a lot, and he would let us go there and visit. So they would pick us up, and then they would beam us down to the house, and we'd hang out there. And sometimes They actually had a few old classic cars
Hmm.
that they kept on board. They really got a kick out of them. And they would beam the cars down, and then one of them was a big old, I think it was a Cadillac or something, rag top, and they would have the top down, and we'd take late night cruises out into the desert, and it was pretty cool.
Yeah. What
So
about?
we better end there,
Oh.
and then we'll start another one.